Hello, this is Red Vitus, and welcome to my channel. This is going to be the assembly video of the Hamilton 940 motor barrel pocket watch. So in my last video, I disassembled this watch and cleaned it. And now I'm going to begin the assembly with this winding pinion. So I always do this winding pinion first on a full plate pocket watch, and it has a few parts. There's the pinion itself and two bridges. This first bridge has feet, so it aligns up with the plate. And there's a cutout for the gear, the vertical gear. So once that's set into plate, the other bridge doesn't have any feet, and so it just slides on. I oil the pinion with HP 1300. On an 18 size pocket watch, it takes quite a bit of force to wind the mainspring, so I think it's a good idea to use a quality heavy oil. Now I'll finish installing the plate by placing each of the 4 screws. If you didn't get a chance to see my video on the disassembly, the watch was in working order when I received it. It was running fairly well. It was keeping decent time, but it had a lot of positional error in the vertical positions and really dried and degraded oil on the jewels. On one jewel, the oil had degraded so bad it looked like it had solidified. So this watch was due for a good cleaning. I didn't find any other major problems during the disassembly, although I did identify one broken jewel. There was one hairline crack on the top balance jewel. The watch probably would have run okay with that crack, but I replaced it with an old stock Hamilton jewel, so no worries there. With the gear installed, I test it to make sure it's free of movement. And next I'll begin working on assembling the gear train. So I use the upside down method of gear train assembly. This is the top plate, and I'm going to put each of the 4 gears in their respective jewels. And then once that's done, I'll place the pillar plate on top. The first gear that goes in is going to be the pallet fork. It's not really a gear, it's part of the escapement. Now this watch has a double roller, so the end of that pallet fork has a safety dart, and the pallet fork extends inside of the cup near the middle of the plate. So just aligning it into place and resting it on the jewel. Next is the escape wheel. And here's the 4th wheel with its long pivot that holds the second hand facing upwards. Here's the center wheel. And last, I'm going to place the 3rd wheel. So you might have noticed something fly onto the screen. I'm going to replay that in slow motion. And there you might see a little piece of fuzz that just blew into the camera and landed on top of my movement conveniently. Now I fished out that piece off camera before continuing on with the assembly. So now I have all the gears in place, and I'm going to collect this pillar plate and try and place it on top. So wish me luck. This is the pillar plate now, and it's the plate that holds the dial. And the basic concept here is to the center pivot sticks out the longest, so I align that one first. And then I go for the fourth wheel, which also has a long pivot. And usually once I get those two in place and I let the pillar plate down, the third wheel pivot usually finds its spot. If it doesn't find its spot, then I'll either try to place it, but I won't work too hard. I find it's easier to lift up the pillar plate and just try again. But in this case, it went in. Now I'm checking the escapement to make sure those pivots are find their jewels. And it looks like they did. So now I want to carefully flip the movement over to install the two bridge screws. So resting it in this movement holder and ensuring that that fourth wheel pivot is not going to be in the way. Now there are two out of four bridge screws that I can install now, and I partially screw them down. I won't completely screw them down until I'm absolutely sure that the gear train is free, which I'll test for, and I'll show that next. So now with each one of the screws in, I'm going to check the gear train, and I'll do that by putting a little bit of tension on the center wheel and verifying that that pallet fork swings back and forth. First quick check, everything looked okay. Now I'm just visually inspecting the jewels to make sure all the pivots are still in place. And I'm going to inspect the end shakes on all the wheels as well. It's a good idea to do this, whether you do it during disassembly or preferably during assembly or both, just to verify that all the pivots have enough end shake and that they're all in the right place. If they're bound somehow and they don't have any end shake, that might indicate that a wheel is not properly aligned. So I'll tighten the screws just a little bit more, still not tightening them all the way. And I'll do one last check of the pallet fork. So now I'm putting continuous pressure on that center wheel and rocking that pallet fork back and forth. Things are looking good, but I'll do one last check. So everything looks fine, and I'll tighten down the screws. And the next part that goes in will be the barrel. During disassembly, I removed the mainspring from the barrel, cleaned it up. Had a lot of dirt in it, so that came off just using some tissue paper and lighter fluid. Wiped it clean, re-oiled it, and reinstalled it into the barrel. placing some HP 1300 or on the bottom hole. Now, I made a statement during disassembly that was probably misleading. I'm paraphrasing myself. I think I said that I don't take the barrel out until the watch is completely disassembled. So that probably wasn't phrased very well. I realized that the barrel can be installed and removed with both plates attached. I don't think Hamilton would have come out with a watch where you couldn't service the barrel without disassembling the watch. So I just wanted to clear that up. You can see just now how I installed the barrel. It goes in not straight down, but with more of a sliding motion inward, because the ratchet wheel has to go underneath and clear the center wheel and third wheel. I'd say overall, installing this barrel was really not much more difficult than a going barrel. I had reservations going into this, but they didn't come true. And I think I feel a lot more comfortable with these motor barrel watches now. So there are two screws that attach the barrel plate to the pillar plate, and those are accessible with the barrel bridge off. Okay, so I was verifying there that the bottom uh, uh, um, pivot went through the hole in the plate, and that looked good. So I'll tighten down the barrel plate all the way. This next part that goes on is the barrel bridge. So I think of all the steps in assembling a full plate watch, I think this is my favorite because this is when that top plate really comes together, and I can admire the design and the craftsmanship that went into making these watches. So while all watch styles have their pluses and minuses, to me these full plate watches are the most satisfying to work on. So now I'm placing the two screws. And next I'll flip the watch over and begin working on the keyless works. So in terms of difficulty, I think that's probably the most difficult steps is assembling the gear train and connecting the plates. The motion work, by comparison, is a lot easier, although it's not any less time consuming because there are quite a few parts. This first part is a yoke spring. And I install this spring without any tension on it, or minimizing the tension on the spring. And once I get that screw started, then I move the spring into position, since I know it won't fly away at that point, and fully tighten the screw. So the next part is the winding assembly. So there's the yoke and a bushing cover plate piece. Don't know what it's called. To assemble that, I use HP 1300. So that plate is the pivot point where the yoke moves between the time setting and watch winding positions. I don't think it receives a whole lot of wear, but nevertheless, I oil each part since this movement probably won't be opened up again for a number of years. Now I oil each one of these posts, so there's 3 of them. Although one I've already oiled, I'll place a little bit more oil on that center post and a little oil on the outside post. And this is where the winding gears go. Now these 3 winding gears, it does matter how they go in. One side of the winding gear, as you'll see next coming up, is flat, and the other side has a slight bevel on the teeth. And I'm placing the beveled end, although it's facing upwards right now, the beveled side faces downward when it's in the watch. So that was the winding wheel, the large one. And this next wheel is an intermediate winding gear. And this last wheel, the little one, is a intermediate setting wheel. I'm going to place a little bit of grease on this post, which is on the underside of the yoke, where it connects with that yoke spring. And the next step is to lift up this yoke assembly, then flip it over and place it into the watch. So things don't always go as planned. One of the wheels fell off when I turned it over, so I'll give it one more try. The oil on the post usually holds those wheels in place, at least temporarily. And this time, on my second try, it worked. And next I can attach the 2 screws. These are right-handed screws. But I won't screw them in all the way. In order to position the yoke spring, I need to lift that yoke a little bit. Now this whole assembly of the Keyless Works is it's identical, or at least almost identical, to the other 940 that I worked on. That was a watch that didn't have a motor barrel, but the rest of the watch is practically the same construction. But there are a couple things that I'll show you this time that I didn't show you before. So I'll try and make this worth your while if you've already seen my other 940 assembly video. So here's where I position the yoke spring. Just it's a matter of getting it to the other side of that post that's underneath. So now I have it, and then I attempt to test it, but that frees it up. So I'm going to try again. And this time I'm going to tighten down the screws before I test it. So now the yoke is under tension. And there are a couple places where I'm going to apply grease. So along this edge is where the setting lever rubs against the yoke. So I'm using KT22 grease. And also placing some on the other end where you have this finger. And that finger knocks against the plate when it ratchets. So I apply some grease there as well. That green putty I'm using is Rodico to clean up any excess grease and oil. Now I'm oiling the center pivot with HP 1300 in preparation to place the canyon pinion. And I also oil the jewel. I'll oil the rest of the jewels off camera. So there's the center wheel jewel and the third jewel, or the third wheel jewel. I'll use HP 1300. Then on the escape wheel and balance wheel, I use 9010. And on the pallet jewels, 9415. So pushing that cannon pinion vertically takes a couple pushes and it goes into place. Now I oil the minute wheel post. And then position the minute wheel, making sure it matches up with the cannon pinion gears. Now the last part of the keyless works is the setting lever and spring. So with the setting lever spring, I have the screw placed into the loop in the spring before I tighten it in. Again, just partially tightening the screw here. It's a small screw and the plate isn't beveled at all, so um, getting it started takes a little patience. Now, this is the setting lever, and there's a post underneath the setting lever, which I match up to the other end of the hole on that setting lever spring. And now there's tension on the setting lever, so I hold it into place with my finger, a gloved finger. and install the setting lever screw. So with this installed, I test the action on that setting lever, and you'll see how this spring works. Now watch carefully as I close the setting lever, and watch the tension on that spring. You see how it compressed. These setting lever springs on this movement receive a lot of stress. And this was the first Hamilton 940 where it still actually had a functioning setting lever spring. They're usually broken and often missing. This next piece is the click, and I'm placing some grease on the click spring and click post. That's a very big, bold click screw. So now with the keyless works assembled, I can test it to make sure everything's in working order. First, I'm going to wind the watch a little bit, and then I'll test the ratcheting action. There it was. So again, here's me winding the watch, and here I am ratcheting. Now I pull out the setting lever and test the setting in both directions, and everything looks good. Now I install the balance. And the balance cock next. Ensuring that the balance pivot is in the jewel. And now it's in. I'll set it in place with the balance cock screw, but I won't screw it all the way in at this point. I still need to position the hairspring stud. It's on the other side of the regulator arm from where it needs to be. And so once I get it to stop its motion, I'll just slide it around and pop it in the into the stud, making sure that the hairspring went in between the regulator pins. Sometimes it doesn't go. And the watch took right off. So I will now tighten the balance cock screw and the two little screws to secure the hairspring stud. And that's how I install a balance. So let's check the timing. Improvement in amplitude from before. 280 versus it was around 240. I think it may have topped at 250 before cleaning. So that's a nice improvement. Timing looks great. And I'll check it in the different positions. And it's running a little slower in the vertical, but I'm not seeing the type of positional variation as from before when it was dirty. And I'll let this watch run overnight and check it again. But I'll do the final regulating once the watch is cased. Now we're back to the original position. So with the watch functioning fine, there's one last wheel to install. I'm going to place some oil on the cannon pinion. This is HP 1300 with a small oiler, so it's a very minimal amount that I'm applying. There's the hour wheel set on top with the dial washer. Next comes the dial. Love that Montgomery dial. So I have a few screws to tighten. Now the dust ring. Easy to forget to put that in. And now I can case it. And there are two case screws. Now let's work on the hands. Here's the hour hand. And I'll check once it's in that it's parallel with the dial. Now verify the setting. And I move it to 1 o'clock to install the minute hand. And that which should also be parallel with the dial. And lastly, the second hand. Now I can set the time and reinstall the bezel. And this is a finished watch. Let's have one last look at it. Glad to see this Hamilton 940 motor barrel in great working order again and keeping excellent time. So this is Red Vitus. Thanks for visiting my channel, and I hope to see you again.